Hey y'all, I'm Zapper, your favorite Immortal 3 yapper. Today, I put together way too many Gamesense tips into one place, with the hopes that at least one thing is going to be something new you don't already know. Some of these are going to be super obvious, by the way, and yes, I'm keeping them in the video, because if my teams in Immortal are making these mistakes, I'm sure some of you guys are too. Enjoy the video. 1. When hitting a team that's on an eco round, it's good to use Initiator utility before hitting a site. There are two reasons for this. People like to buy shotguns when low on money, so it's good to spot out locations before dry peeking. People also like stacking sites when low on money, which brings me to tip number 2. If the enemy team is stacked on site, you should rotate. Why hit a site with 5 players when you can hit a site with 0? Number 3. It's good to check the scoreboard in between each round. There's two main reasons for this. If the enemy can afford an op, you need to either jump peek common angles, or use utility to push the potential op off the angle. You should also be checking ults. A very common example would be checking for Brim ult on bind. You should never play U-Haul if Brim has ult, because you will feed a free kill for no reason. 4. Okay, you know the enemy has an op. One of the best strategies on attacker side is to avoid the op, which is often why you see operators rotate after they get spotted. Another way to counter op is to overwhelm them. On retake, ops are pretty useless, so if you can dump a bunch of util onto the op and get bomb down, you'll have a much easier time dealing with them. 5. Off angles are super strong. If you're holding an off angle with good crosshair placement, you will win your gunfight the majority of the time. The only time you have a disadvantage while holding an off angle is if the enemy uses utility on you. Basically, utility counters off angles. Use utility if the enemy is on an off angle, or you can also jump peek if you don't have any utility left. If you want to play an off angle, it's best if you're doing it unpredictably or late in the round. The later in the round the better, because most players will have used most of their utility by then. 6. It takes 3.5 seconds to get the spike to half. This means if you wait 3.5 seconds before peeking after a tap, you can potentially catch the enemy while they're pulling their gun out. As long as you peek before the 7-second mark, you can catch the enemy off before they fully defuse. Anywhere between the 3.5 and 7-second mark is the best, because if they aren't on the spike, you're actually putting more pressure on them by not peeking. At the end of the day, the spike needs to be defused in order for the defenders to win. When late into a round, if you're looking at common places for an enemy but still haven't spotted them, they're likely flanking. This can be a cool moment to show your team that you have superhuman senses. Just think about it. The round timer is ticking down, enemy has to make a play. Why would they be sitting AFK waiting for the last second to do something? It's possible, but very unlikely. Chances are they're walking around the map in order to not be heard. But little do they know, they're taking too long, which can make the lurk very predictable. What if you are the lurker? Well, you want to be as unpredictable as possible in order to catch the enemy off guard. If you're taking too long and your team's dying, sometimes it's better to give up your location to join in the fight before everyone dies. On the other hand, if your team is staying alive without your help, feel free to take as long as you want with the flank in order to make sure you can catch the enemies from behind. Something I do very sparingly, but it's kind of funny, is if you sprint down flank, if you know the enemies are rushing. Sometimes when the enemy's running it down, they're not going to hear your steps flanking because they're making too much noise. When you do this, sometimes you'll catch the entire team with their back turn. Number 9. On defense, if you're on site by yourself, sometimes it's better to just play retake with your team. 5v5 retake is better than 5v4 with you dead. This is even more true if you have really good retake utility. This can be flashes, smokes, and honestly any initiator util. On the other hand, if you're confident you can get a pick before getting out, that can be super strong as well. Just by slowing down the enemy for 3 to 8 seconds, it can make a big difference on the site hold. This can be the difference maker between your team being there to help and you dying alone. 10. Let's be honest, some days you're on fucking fire and you can win any gunfight. On these days, feel free to just run it down and get as many kills as you can. This is the fastest way to win and rank up on the days you're feeling it. On the contrary, you're going to have days where you're playing like a total booty. These are the days where teamwork and smart decision making mean the most. If you can't win a duel for shit, you best be getting the maximum value out of your death. That means maximizing utility value, good comms, flashing your team out, following or running in first to gain space for your team, etc. It's important to recognize how well you are playing in a given day and accepting it for what it is. Humans are inconsistent, and so instead of beating yourself up for having a bad day, adjust and do your best with what you have. 11. Playing with your team is often the best strategy, even if they're making the wrong play. Oftentimes, taking a bad fight with your team is going to be better than taking a good one by yourself. There are exceptions to this though. If you have spike down, maybe don't run it down into enemy spawn. Once spike's planted, the primary advantage you have is that the enemy has to defuse. You can and should play around this advantage to the maximum. Use mollies, flashes, smokes, anything you can to delay the enemy. Once spike is down, they only really have 45 seconds to defuse, and 7 of those are going to be spent actively defusing. So the pressure is on, abuse it. On the other hand, pushing up can be good for controlling more space, especially if you know the areas are clear. Just don't get too kill hungry, because if you're running it down after spikes planted every time, that's just a mistake. 12. Don't be holding obvious angles. You'd think this is simple, but a lot of people do this. If you're holding an angle that gets hard cleared every round, you are not going to get any kills. If you really want to control the space with an angle that's obvious, you need to be peeking on timings to catch the enemy off guard. On timings just means sporadically to avoid the enemy peeking the angle while you're standing in the open. 13. Sometimes it's better to not clear every angle. Other times you should clear every angle. Confusing, right? That's why Gamesense is hard. It's your senses for the game. Sometimes you just know there's no one in a corner and you should be holding for the peek that's more dangerous. We've all had that moment where we clear a corner right as someone peeks us from where we were just looking. It's a shitty feeling. If you're really scared of a corner, definitely clear it. I'm just saying, don't clear everything because you feel like you have to. Do it when you think it's necessary. This is something you need to work on for a little while to fully understand. It's all about percentages. A 5% chance someone's in a corner with a 95% chance you're going to get peeked. I'd hold for the peek. Still means 5 out of 100 times you die for free, but at least the other 95% you have a fighting chance. Which brings me to my next point. 14. Sometimes sitting in a corner is really strong. If you know the enemy isn't going to use any util to clear you out, sitting in corners can be really strong. Corners can be hard to clear with dry peeks because there are so many potential off angles, and this can be exemplified even further if you have your team peeking off your contact. Not to mention, if you pick the right corner and you do it sparingly, you can often catch people off guard. This tip takes advantage of the fact that it's better to not clear angles at times. 15. Think about the utility the enemy is using on their pushes and then try to counter it. Oftentimes, teams will use their utility in the same way every round and for every site hit. If you can catch on to how they're using it, you can win the entire defending half pretty easily. For example, if they dart the same spot every round, break it right away to deny info. Hide from drone, flash out smoke, molly choke points if they always rush, etc. 16. Playing quick rotate is super strong until it isn't. Most games, it's safe to rotate as early as possible in ranked because most teams will just rush. By rotating right away, you can maximize the amount of gunfights you're present for, and by association, the amount of impact you have in each game. Just watch out for games with lurkers. There are certain players who base their entire playstyle around lurking. If you notice someone lurking every round, you can use this fact to get free kills. Instead of instantly rotating to help your team, just sit back in a weird corner or off angle and wait for them to walk into you for a free kill. 17. Okay, what if you want more impact as a lurker? Well, it's actually pretty easy. A lot of the time you just need to go really slow, give no indication you're there, and then wait for enemies to make noise leaving. Then you can either walk up and take space so your team can rotate, or if you're close enough, peek out and get a kill on rotating enemies. Just be careful with this because if your team gets mad at you you're lurking, it's often not worth it to do it. I'd say lurking is best used sparingly to scare the enemy into rotating slower on defense, or to try and find a pick when your team's struggling to get the bomb down. 18. If your team's struggling to hold a specific site, switch up the sites your team is holding. Maybe stack heavy on your weak side with more players, or simply just change who is playing where. This can be helpful for a few reasons. Sometimes players are just not good at holding specific sites, and it can be beneficial for them to play on the other side of the map. Other times, certain characters have better utility for different areas on the map, and can have more impact by switching sites. Most of all, it can be helpful to get a change of pace, and that alone can sometimes get your team out of a slump. 19. Man advantage is a crazy thing in Valorant. Just ask any pro player. This is because it gives a major advantage. If you have numbers, do everything in your power to keep it. Don't peek silly angles. If anything, play retake with your team on defense, or on offense, group up slowly, and then hit something together. This is also the reason why first bloods are the most important kills in a round. If you can get a first blood and survive, you increase your chances of winning the round by a big margin. That being said, if you get first blood, do everything in your power to stay alive afterwards. On the other end of the spectrum, if you find yourself dying first a lot, it's essential you play more passively. If you're giving away first blood every round, you're putting your team at a big disadvantage. 20. People don't hate me for this tip because it's super important, especially with the new weapon. Economy, guys. Your economy is super important. Please don't undervalue it. If you win first round, please full buy on the second. It's basically a free round if you play it correctly with better guns. That being said, be careful forcing on the second round if you lost the first round. Imagine losing the first 2 rounds, forcing Light Shield Vandal round 3, and then getting one-tapped by Outlaw. You're now guaranteed at least 4 round deficit because you will have no money on the 4th round as well. Always try to match up your economy with your team. If they are saving, save. If they're buying, buy. There's just no reason to have a full buy if your entire team has no money, and vice versa. You're just giving away free value by doing this. Well, that's it. I know it's a lot, but hopefully you learned something. Okay, bye.